This is the second video of our Power and Conflict series for GCSE AQA English Literature. Last time we looked at Ozymandias in the first video. Please do watch them in sequence so we get a cumulative sense of how the poems are developing and how the ideas are all connecting as well. This time we're looking at London by William Blake, published 1793, maybe 1794. The oldest poem in the anthology, but placed second. Why? For you to think about. Another romantic, but as the oldest, William Blake, when we look at the romantics as a period, we put him first because he's the oldest. But as I said last time, Wordsworth and Coleridge, I would say, are slightly separate, and you could argue are the real first generation of romantics, in that William Blake as a person was an outsider within this group of people. He did not go to university, which at that time was only Oxford or Cambridge. Unlike Shelley, unlike Wordsworth, who we'll have next. Shelley and Wordsworth, Shelley, for example, we talked about how he went away. He left England and he went to Italy. He was in Italy for a lot of his life. Not just Italy, but the continent in general, Europe. He left England, often on the run. Wordsworth is someone who early in his life really followed the French Revolution and aspirated to it and idealised the French Revolution. And then when it descended into this reign of terror, kind of was treated with a lot of shame and slightly embarrassed, I would say, by that initial aspiration he had for revolution. Not just him, quite a few romantics. Because of that, he retreated away into the Lake District, and people came to visit him and things, but he wasn't in the centre of life, and he wasn't in the centre of art and culture, which was and still is the capital, London. That is the title of the poem that we're going to look at today. Blake is different from those two, from Shelley and Wordsworth, because Blake was a Londoner. He was born in London and he died in London. From start to finish, he was in the city and of the city. And in terms of education, he didn't go to university. His father was a tradesman, and so he therefore didn't come from the social class that Wordsworth and Shelley come from. Very much an outsider, and I would say very conscious of it as well. Not to his detriment, not conscious of it to his detriment, but he was conscious of it, which you couldn't fail to be in this society. Therefore, when we talk about romantics, and we often talk about nature and nature poetry and this idealization of the beauty of nature and poems about nature, which is really talking about Wordsworth in many ways, Blake doesn't quite fit into that. Yes, he does write about nature, but it's always got a very strong political bent to it for me. Blake's political. The other thing that distinguishes Blake, which is why he's my favourite romantic, maybe even poet, who knows, haven't decided, is that I would say he was a multimedia artist. He wasn't just a poet. So first of all, he was homeschooled, didn't get sent to formal school by his mother, who came from a very specific religious sect that placed a lot of emphasis on hymns and enthusiastic religious singing and looking at visual art as a way of encountering the divine and kind of having a spiritual experience. Looked at children as being somehow in an innocent state where they're closer to the divine, and maybe William Blake himself had visions when he was a child of angels in a tree, angel wings as the leaves of a tree and things. So a very unconventional education and upbringing. He then in total did 11 years of art school, you could say, 4 years of in a drawing school, and then 7 years as an apprentice to an engraver. And this is what really he was. He was an engraver, and commercially he worked as an engraver. What that meant is he was engraving images that were then printed alongside texts for publishers. So he is a visual artist, he is a word artist, he is a musical artist, I would say. And so that's something we really need to remember when we look at London, that he called this collection of poems, of which London is one, he called them songs of experience, songs. This is a song. And in his cultural circle, he used to sing his songs. He had no musical knowledge, or formal musical knowledge, we should say, but he sang. And he sang these poems to a tune, or not these, even ones he wrote before, to a tune. We have no surviving evidence, if there ever was any, of the tune, so we don't know what they would have sounded like. And that's just, a big shame, because it'd be fascinating to know. But I think what we can say is they would have been kind of common hymn tunes, and they wouldn't be really overwrought and like classical music. It would be very common tunes, maybe even lullabies, hymns, very simple but very penetrating and anthems in a way that really rouse the spirit. So that's something we need to keep in mind. And as we read the poem, I think it will hit us straight away. So let's look at it. As always, first thing I look at is the title. The title is London. London is a city. The Romantics were reacting against Enlightenment and before that Renaissance ideas that moved into kind of rational, empirical spaces like we talked about last video. And the city was emblematic, in a way, symbolic of this movement from our native state of man, our natural state, into this confined, constrained, restrictive space. So like with Ozymandias, straight away we're talking about space. The title straight away puts me in the space of London, which is tight, packed, claustrophobic, overpopulated. I am in a vastly different space, vastly to use Shelley's adjective. I'm in a vastly different space to the desert, to that boundless and bare desert. This is already tight. I'm similar to I am also a Londoner, so for me, I feel this, London, you straight away, you feel it in your bones. We're in a tight space now, London. On the one hand, you love it, on the other hand, you hate it. So I've straight away got this sense of constriction. Also of concentration of power. On the one hand, you love it. For me personally, on the one hand, I love London because everything's at my fingertips and I can experience all of life here, and it's the seat of power, it's this of the country, it's the seat of government. The king lives here. Everything's happening here. It's the cultural epicenter of the nation. Yet, on the other hand, there's a push and pull. The push is that it's overpopulated, it's crammed, it's tight, people are living on top of each other. For example, now, rent prices are really high. Think about all these things in any big city that people complain about. So he's titled his poem London. Let's read. I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most, through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So, straight away, structurally, 4 stanzas, rhythmically regular, very simple rhythm, but quite a tight, rigid, constrained rhythm, right? It seems to be A, B, A, B. Yeah, we've got street, meet, flow, woe, man, ban, fear, here, etc. So it's a very regular rhythm. Four lines each. Looks very symmetrical and ordered. Looks regimental. Very typical of Enlightenment period, perhaps. Some of these values that he's actually reacting against incredibly strongly. Why has he done that? Why has he imposed that rigid, metrical and structural superstructure onto his song? By calling them songs, it's like they shouldn't ever be fossilized. They are something to be performed. Everything has meaning, and especially for Blake, everything, you've got to think about everything. I didn't mention one of the key things, which is that he self-published his poems. So he was an engraver. And what he did is, as I keep saying poem, I need to say song, because it's a song, yeah, his songs. He composed the songs in a notebook, which he inherited from his brother. Then, on a copper plate, using acid-resistant chemicals, he engraved a visual design, and he mirror wrote his song into that design. So these songs, so we've got lots of layers again, like tissue. We've got layers of media going on here, not just ideas, but media. It's layers of things. So we've got the song in its abstract sense, okay? But he's very deliberately decided to print these in a painstaking way, okay? He's probably done the most painstaking publication process of anyone in this anthology. Now, he's made in a way a poster. In a way you could describe it as a poster. It has visual elements, but the text is within the art. So it is word art. Or is it visual poetry? What's the division between the two? Fascinating questions he's asking in 1789 or the 1780s, the late 18th century, let's say. He is asking so many questions about, these divisions between art and poetry and literature and the image and the word. Like I talked about last week, which is some of my personal feelings, the word itself is a symbol. Letters, sounds, in our system, letters represent sounds, phonemes. But not in every language around the world do the writing systems reflect sound. Sometimes it's pictographic writing where the word actually is like a picture and doesn't in any way correlate to the sound it makes. Try and keep that global perspective at all times, by the way. So to get back to Blake, for me, he's asking all these questions. He is blurring the line between word and image. And he was acutely aware, like I said, of, you know, the illiterate, the uneducated, people who don't belong to that upper class intelligentsia of Oxbridge graduates, or people in the upper strata of society who've all been educated and got, you know, perfect knowledge of multiple ancient languages, etc., etc. He was brought up with people who were illiterate, who couldn't read or write English, let alone Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. And somewhere he says that, you know, the illiterate man can understand stuff better than these overeducated people. Because all these things are pretense. Education is some kind of structure as well. That's a power structure that we carry around. What does it actually mean? You know, Wordsworth, our next poet, said that you learn more in nature than you do from reading books and stuff. Just go into nature, you'll learn more. What do you think? What are your views on this? Now, so each song has its own engraved illustration, but I mean, we shouldn't use that word because it's not an illustration to it's not secondary to the text. It is all part of the song that he's written. So this is art. And I mean, I'm always saying that English literature is art, but you need to really understand that in its origins, this isn't a poem that's meant to be on paper. Okay, I mean, it's very removed that it's in this anthology. Okay, he hand printed all these posters in a way. These engravings, let's call them. Now, the engraving for London features at the top, Google it, look it up, features at the top an old man, bearded, white-haired old man with a stick, being led, perhaps blind, being led by a young boy. An old blind man being led by a young boy. Then you've got the poem, song, text, lyrics, let's say. Halfway through about stanza 3, you've got a fire, an orange blazing warm fire, with a young boy warming his hands against it. That's the images that Blake carefully chose to accompany the song text, the lyrics. We'll come back to think about why, maybe, who knows, no one knows. Okay, it's all postulation, we're guessing. Back to the poem. First word, again, much like Ozymandias, much like Wordsworth in the prelude, I. First person singular, I. We've talked about subjectivity and the romantics, the importance of individual experience. Okay, Blake especially was very vehemently against what he called single vision, which was from people like Newton, who looked outside and therefore went from outside in. So Newton saw the apple falling on the floor and he said, oh, there must be gravity, there must be something pulling that apple down to the earth, and he labelled that gravity. He looked outside to learn something true about our existence. Blake said that kind of simple, literal view of the world, which only relies on our senses, doesn't understand everything, doesn't understand the multifaceted nature of reality. We can't comprehend, what he's saying is we can't comprehend everything through our senses. So if we rely just on our senses, we're missing the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture? Who has access to the bigger picture? Now, in something else, he labels these levels of vision. So he says single vision is like a Newtonian single vision, or Locke. If you're interested in these things, look it up. Or Francis Bacon. They have single vision. And in a way, saying these people are directing society, and society's following this single vision, which is leading to this negation of our true selves. But then he said there's a twofold vision. where I see a thistle as one, a thistle is like a plant. I see a thistle as one thing, but I also see it as like an old man. So he's got this like artistic sensibility. Then he's even says there's a threefold vision and a fourfold vision. So that's showing you the nature of this person, okay? That he thinks there are multiple lenses on reality. He doesn't see something like a pen and think it's one thing. I look at this pen and it's a red burgundy pen, but it could also be a statue in a storm. Okay, bad example. Start thinking about these things. Start thinking about perspectives and how we look at things, and how might someone else look at things. So is there such a thing as objective truth? I wander through each charted street near where the charted Thames does flow. Obviously, the word that jumps out at you is charted. Charted. Charted is repeated in the first two lines. Charted street is an adjective in this case, and then we've got charted Thames. Street, for me, straight away, I've got that sense of constriction. I'm in a tight street now. I'm not in the boundless and bare, lone and level sand stretching far away. I'm in a tight space. We've talked about the urban environment we're in now. Each charted street, and every we've got later, which suggests that this is one of many. He's not being specific, he's not naming anything. It's all very anonymous because he's suggesting that it's a universal truth and this is repeated. You get that sense strongly in this poem that the things he zooms in on are actually just one of millions and many and innumerable. So again, that sense of scale that we had in Ozymandias that was differently focused in Ozymandias, but again coming here, that he's showing us one thing, but it represents many. And a lot of the poems do that. Or they show us a group that represents some commonality in our human condition. So it's that play between, do you zoom in on something or do you show everything? Poets are generally trying to focus our attention onto something, whether or not they do it literally. So here he's not trying to focus our attention. He's saying each charted street. But that's telling us he's trying to focus on the fact that this is something that's all throughout London, spreading throughout London like a disease, which is an image that comes later. Charted. Now, charted has many connotations, and at this time, when he wrote this poem, had many connotations. Song, when he wrote this song, had many connotations. Charted had a positive connotation of a charter, or a kind of like the Magna Carta was the Magna Charta. It's something that is a declaration of who we are, of what we stand for. But also, on the other hand, it's something that suggests possession and legal ownership. If you charter some land, you are mapping it literally. You are measuring it. You are drawing lines through it. Cross-reference tissue. You are demarcating, dividing it, and thereby making it ownable, sellable, a commodity, something you can buy and sell, something you can have as property. Now, this is something did I talk about Rousseau last time? Rousseau is someone that the Romantics were all aware of, and Rousseau was very against the idea of private property, because he said, how can you own nature? London and the city, the idea of a city is based completely on the idea of private property and chartering. Like I said, rents are high. Rents are high because people have chartered the land, own the lease on the land, and then are renting it to people and can decide how much rent they charge. So it's an unnatural state of being. This, for Blake, is not our natural state of being. We shouldn't have to be fighting over space in this way. So chartered is important in that sense. For me, it also has that sense of colonized. Once you charter something, you make it yours. You say, I possess this, this is mine. You put your name to it. Remember, I said naming is a big idea that runs through these poems, because a name is a manifestation of power and leads to conflict. Near where the chartered Thames does flow, the Thames, the River Thames, the river, symbol of vitality and nature that has been chartered. Man has even tried to charter nature, something that's uncontrollable, something that's wild and free. And mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. So we've gone from the street and the Thames to the faces of the people. And how do these faces compare with the visage in Ozymandias? Gone from the stone visage, the shattered stone visage, to these real flesh and blood faces of people. But they're anonymous, they don't have a name. They don't shout to us, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. They are voiceless. It is Blake who is giving them a voice in his poem. He is giving a voice to the voiceless, very consciously so. Mark in every face. So again, we've got that every, indeterminate because it's countless. Every face. He marks, i.e. he notices marks of weakness, marks of woe. Great line. Marks, key word. Okay, marks. Remember last time we were talking about stamps and impressions and trying to leave a mark behind as a very human instinct. And all art, and his art, especially Blake's art, is mark making. He is mark making. But what's he noticing? He's noticing marks of weakness and marks of woe. Weakness, literally the opposite of power, an antonym for power. And woe, the affective side, not the effects of power, but the affects of power. Woe, psychological sorrow, sadness, the dark side of the human soul. Oh yeah, remembering that the subtitle of Songs of Innocence and Experience was showing the two contrary states of the human soul. Innocence, what we should be, and experience, what ends up happening due to the oppressive societal structures around us and above us and within our minds. Stanza 2, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear. So we've gone from the visual in stanza 1. I note, I mark, marks of weakness, of visual, noting the visual aspects, into sound, auditory imagery. Now, what did I tell you? I told you he was a visual artist, but he was also a musical artist. These are songs. So in a way with Blake, you have this synesthesia, this combination of senses. In every cry of every man, human. In every infant's cry of fear. Now Blake always brings it back to the infant, the child, in that, that innocent state before we had all this conditioning, this external conditioning, how we are innately is corrupted by society. Cry of fear, the infant's having to fear. The infant should be rejoicing and in a state of play. But the infant is having to fear. So from the cradle to the grave, people are powerless. We've got the man in line 5 and then the infant. In every voice, in every man. We've got this multiplicity of voices around us, much like in Shelley's poem, where we've got many voices. You know, we've got the traveller, we've got the speaker, we've got the sculptor, we've got Ozymandias. Here he just puts in every voice, just literally lays it out there, in every voice. Yeah, so it's like we can hear so many voices. With Blake, it's always like sensory overload, especially this one. Every voice. It's like you can hear all the different crying going on all across London, and pain and distress and sorrow going on all across London. Imagine right now if you could hear that. The cacophony of pain. In every ban, now that word ban again has many connotations. You've got, it used to mean a swear word, so like a curse word, people swearing, which of course he would have heard, we could still hear. But also a ban as in the sense of a prohibition, something you're not allowed to do, something you're banned from doing. Around this time there was a lot of kind of banning of seditious talk, so anything against the government, anything that might spark revolt was very carefully banned. So there were lots of bans going on, and Blake thought he was going to be banned many times, or, you know, executed many times, but he got through. The mind, in every voice in every band, the mind forged manacles I hear. Probably one of the best lines of the whole anthology. Mind forged manacles. Manacles, shackles, handcuffs. Manacle, manus, Latin for hand, handcuffs, literally, okay? Mind forged. This is where he starts playing with visible and invisible power structures. Okay, and he starts in a very visual way with the marks, but now he's going into the invisible power structure. So he's going from very literal external sense experience of the marks into the cry, so hearing, again senses, but maybe less strong than the visual. And now he's going into invisible stuff you can't see with the eye, with the senses. Now, isn't this his argument, that we can't just rely on the single vision of sense perception like Newton, like Locke, like Bacon? We can't. We need to be able to rely on our intuition, and whatever we bring from inside, we can bring meaning from inside to the external. And these mind-forged manacles of his in line 5, 6, 7, 8 are an example of both sides of that, the positive and the negative. On the one hand, we can notice, if we are awake to these things, the power structures that are trying to control us, like the manacles, the mind-forged manacles. But on the other hand, we can also oppress others. Okay, so we have to be aware of all the layers of meaning, and in a way the layers of vision is what is his language. Blake calls it the like vision, the different levels of vision. I say layers, and I'm thinking of tissue. He hears the mind-forged manacles. Again, he's mixing up his senses, playing with that idea, because at that time everyone was sense-obsessed. We can only go by what our senses perceive as being reality. And Blake's saying that's so restrictive and limiting and artificial, because it's so much more than just sense experience. Look at this, the mind-forged manacles. No one can see them. I can't see them. I can't hear them. He's saying he can. He's playing with the idea. Whew. Stanza 3. How the chill. Okay, this is where we get the individuals coming in. Okay, it's been very general up until now, very generic. Like we said, remember these things that poets play with, the generic, and then they become specific straight away. How the chimney sweepers cry. Now, chimney sweepers. This is something that he, in his Songs of Innocence, he has a poem, he has a song called The Chimney Sweeper, and then he has another one in Songs of Experience, and now he's brought him up here. This is someone that plagues Blake. Blake's conscience is plagued by this chimney sweeper figure. Okay, and what is the chimney sweeper? The chimney sweeper is a child, a poor child, maybe without parents, or whose parents have sold them into this trade, this job, or kind of slavery, maybe Blake would say, where they are being, because they're small, they can fit into the chimneys behind me, like a chimney, fire chimney. They can fit in there and sweep it, clean it out, because there would have been real coal fires back then. What does that bring up for you? I know what it's bringing up for me. What does that bring up for you? How do you feel about that? Kids being put up there. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appall. Oh, he's bringing in the church. He is looking at young people again, because this is something very strong for him. The young, abuses of power are worst affect the vulnerable, and obviously the young are vulnerable and the poor are vulnerable, and these are young, poor individuals who are exploited by society, and worse, he's laying it on thick here, exploited by religion, by the church, which is apparently trying to be the emblem of good and what is good in society. But look what they're doing, look what they're promoting, look at their hypocrisy. The chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls. Look at that adjective. Blackening. Yeah. The soot that the chimney sweepers are sweeping. Oh, that's weird. The soot is black. The chimney sweepers are literally usually covered in soot and black. The church is meant to be a symbol of light, isn't it? Not darkness and blackness. Appalls. Literally like makes pale, but also could be, a pall was like a black cloth that you put over a coffin. So it could be blackens. Okay. It's a stain. It's pollution. This using child labour in a church is a hypocritical act that defiles infancy in a way. And he's adding more now. And the hapless soldier's sigh. Hapless, big adjective, unfortunate. Okay, the soldier, another. So we've got the chimney sweeper was the first kind of figure. Again, anonymous, we don't know their names. Not like Ozymandias. We don't know their names. The soldier, we don't know how many soldiers are in this anthology. Go through and count the number of soldiers. Just Charge of the Light Brigade gives you 600 straight away. Count all the numbers of soldiers. Include Blake's. Think about all the soldiers that have died. That's why we have these minute silences and things. Because it's hard to commemorate that. How do we commemorate that? That vast, that quantity of loss. The hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. The sigh, which is an auditory thing, a sound, becomes a visual thing, runs in blood down palace walls. Now he's incriminating the monarchy, the palace, this structure of power, this monument of power, this edifice of power, like Ozymandias' statue, like the church, that preaches to serve the people, but is in fact feeding off the suffering of the common man, of the common human. Religion and monarchy are being shown as hypocritical. And we've got this contrast between these visible and these invisible institutions that are controlling us. People talk about how in stanza 3, the first letter of each line spells out a word. If you're interested in that, look at it, think about it. Don't get overly excited by it, because this poem has much deeper and more interesting ideas than little games like that. But notice these things, okay? It might help you remember the auditory side of the poem, the fact that it's a song. It's a song. Blake wanted it to be a song. Last stanza. But most, right, he's directing our attention now. He's saying, he's laid it on thick, okay? He's taken us through all this pain and suffering. But now he's telling us, listen, I'm going to really show you the true reality now. But most through midnight streets, we're back to the streets, I hear, keyword, how the youthful harlots curse. There's already so much there. Harlot is a prostitute. Okay? Underage prostitution was all over the place in London of that late 18th century. The exploitation of children was taken for granted. It was normal. It was absolutely normal. And all these institutions, the church, the monarchy, were there in the middle of it all and looking on it. And coexisting with it. And he's looking at it. And he's finding that there's a deep hypocrisy in society that's saying we should rely on sense perception and be ordered and logical and rational about everything. But you're missing all these injustices in society. And that's why he's making it so harrowing. Because he's saying, if that's what you care about, if sense perception is all you care about, here you go. How can you be ignoring this? You're choosing to look at things and ignore certain other things. And that's going to be a common thing, because that's something poetry is all about, is saying, look at this which you've been ignoring, or that society wants you to not see. Look at it. Points at it. That's what all art, I know every video I'm saying, all art is pointing at something and forcing us to look at it. Good art, let's qualify that, good art. And this is good art. She's youthful, the harlot is useful. By the way, this is the first woman, female entity we've had so far. Think about how this youthful harlot contrasts with the Duchess in Browning's poem. Yeah, I think that's an interesting contrast, isn't it? Those two. Both of them don't have a voice. Blake doesn't give the harlot a voice. Oh, the curse. But for different reasons. How might it change the poem if he gave them all voices? The chimney sweeper, the soldier, the harlot. If he put their speech in. I think it would detract from it being a song that's kind of symbolic and has its own power, because that's moving into almost like a documentary format. This is something that he wanted it to be like symbolic, like almost like an image or a song. He didn't want it to be real in a way. You know, prose is real, but this is verse, this is song, this is poetry. This takes on greater significance. The youthful harlot's curse, so her swearing or her anger, on the other hand, could be something else. Blasts, strong verbs, violent verbs of war. Blast the newborn again the infant from stanza 2. We're another infant now, or maybe the same. That's pointless. It's about general suffering of children. Infants tear. And again, he always adds another layer for us, another layer of vision, another way to look at it. And blights, very biblical, with plague, this is biblical, yeah, with plagues, the marriage hearse. Now, he didn't go to uni and stuff, he was homeschooled. Bible study would have been really important. His mum was religious. Bible study would have been, so the language of the Bibles, he's a complete expert. Blights with plagues, the marriage hearse. Ooh. Last oxymoron. The hearse is like the coffin, what you're dragged off in when you die, when you're a dead corpse. That's a corpse. Few things to unpack here. So the curse, now we've looked at it in this context, could also be a venereal disease, an STI. Think about it. If prostitution in general was just an accepted commonality in London, then of course what's that going to lead to? STIs, disease. And when they didn't know where things like that came from and what led to these things, it was scary and almost took on a biblical sense of it's some kind of plague that's spreading and maybe thereby associated with sin, wrongfully placed sin. Do you blame the harlot, or do you blame the people using the harlot and the structures of society that make people need to use harlots? Why do people go to harlots? Why is it so common? For Blake, marriage was a really controlling institution as well. Marriage was another invisible power structure that controlled people, because you had to kind of get married and could only be intimate with people once you were married. And Blake's saying what that leads to is that maybe people don't aren't actually committed to someone, don't feel that commitment to someone. It's just a societal expectation to get married. So they end up going to these harlots and doing all these dark things because you're negating their inner needs. Society's not letting people be naturally what they are, and it's trying to control people's desires, and that leads to these desires erupting in negative ways. There's both sides of the argument we could look at, and there's lots of issues with these things. But by the way, he himself got married. He didn't have kids, but he did get married, and it seems to be a supportive relationship. She used to colour his prints and stuff, so it's very interesting. So for Blake, marriage is an oppressive institution, again, an invisible one this time, again, invisible. The mind-forged manacles, the marriage hearse, these are things we can't see but are palpable. Just because we can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. If there's one thing you remember about Blake in this video, that for me sums Blake up and this poem. Blake, let's say. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And blights with plagues, the marriage hearse. So again, the venereal disease reading works here, the STIs, because the youthful harlot's curse is the STI, and it blasts the newborn infant's tear because STIs are passed to babies in the womb. Okay, so when the baby's born, it has an STI, if the mother had one, in some cases. And also, obviously in the marriage, it then gets spread within the marriage. So people are contracting these STIs. It's spreading. Wow. Notice that I'm just thinking about the present tense as well throughout. This is a present tense poem. because we are in the here and now. I've talked about space, and I always talk about time as well. Time, we are here and now. This is the present reality of London. This isn't some detached desert in time and space far away. This isn't put away somewhere in the middle of the Egyptian desert. This is in London, which is home. For me as well, this is home. This is my territory. This is my turf. I'm not travelling here. I am here. This is my life. Okay? And then in time, this is now. I wander. What have we got? Present tense verbs. Wander, flow, meet, hear, appalls, runs. Okay? We're no longer witnessing far away relics of power. We're seeing it firsthand. He's giving us first-hand experience, even if you're not from London. You read this poem and I think you can say you've been to London. Thinking about our keywords, effects and affects of power. This one's strong on affects, right? The affects obvious, but the affects, look at the affects of power on people. The affects, that the ways people are affected by these power structures, visible and invisible. I'll leave